Hello there. This is a video on theoretical and conceptual frameworks created to help novice researchers, such as graduate students, make the distinction between the two. Sometimes in the literature, these terms are used interchangeably, and so it can be somewhat confusing. Hopefully this video helps. Professional disciplines, such as education, have a theory versus practice discourse, and I wonder how apt this relationship is. Is it the case that theory and practice are in operation in our education practice, but in a parallel manner, and therefore not really involved in each other? Or do theory and practice intersect? With respect to research, what is the relationship between theory and the conduct of research? Theory is derived from the Greek term theoria, which means to behold or to view. It has the same root as theater, as the scholar Howell explains, which provides reflections on society and the world. Howell, in fact, argues that theory is a way of viewing or reflecting on the world, and in this way it's different from the knowledge of how the world is, meaning reality or truth. Social sciences have come to mirror natural sciences or confront it, but there are important distinctions involving the nature of knowledge and reality, which is ontology, and the relationship between humanity and knowledge, which is epistemology, and then, of course, issues regarding rigor when testing knowledge, which is methodology. And that's going a little bit beyond what I really want to talk about, but it's important to know that these terms are all connected so that when you come across them in your reading, then you will have confidence that you know what is being explained. So theory has pedestrian or common use, and so people say, well, my theory of this is that, but in research it means a particular thing. And there's also a distinction to be made between the natural sciences and the social sciences. So is the theory that explains this, and this is a picture of the Grand Canyon, which of course can be explained by theory of plate tectonics, is it the same as what can explain this? And that's me standing in the Grand Canyon when I was hiking it. And so a person's experience of nature or viewing something as magnificent as the Grand Canyon, are those two kinds of theories, plate tectonics, and then the experience of being somewhere, or the phenomenon of travel, nature, etc., equitable? The key question is there a difference between the social world and the natural world? And if so, what's the difference and how do you characterize it? Alexander claims that the social sciences, in contrast to the natural sciences, will always be characterized by multiple theoretical orientations. It'll never achieve the degree of consensus about empirical references or explanation schemes characteristic of the natural science. The natural world exists as it does, independent of human beings. That's not to say that human influence doesn't shape the natural world. But natural science theories are nomothetic. That means that they are law-like. So theory of gravity holds in Canada, in Saskatchewan, Alberta. It holds in countries in Asia and Europe. It doesn't matter where you are. Gravity can explain why things fall. The exception, of course, would be the moon. Another example is water. Water always boils at a certain temperature and freezes at a certain temperature. Human beings will not behave the same under the same conditions. So 29 degrees Celsius for some people is comfortable, for others it's unbearable. Some people love winter, others get really sad in winter. So social science theory is defined in terms of its ability to provide validity and understanding rather than its ability to measure, prove, or predict. So that's a key distinction between theory in the natural and social sciences. When defining terms, I always think it's important to talk about what something is not. So this particular slide was adapted from Dr. Paul Newton from the University of Saskatchewan, and he emphasizes from Sutton and Staw that theory in research is not hunch or suspicion. You know, I've heard some educators theorize that family breakup or single-parent households have resulted in less parent involvement in schools. It's not anything that's derived from empirical evidence. It's sort of a speculation. It's not references. Data itself is not theory. A list of variables or constructs is not theory. Diagrams, models aren't theory, although those can be used to explain theory. And hypotheses and predictions are not theory. So just to get in your minds how theory is used in common parlance and how it's used in research. There are many definitions, and scholars have come up with different ways of describing what theory is. Some of them are a little bit abstract, but, understanding theory as a model or a map for the way the world is by Strauss, the point on the bottom there, I think is a nice one. Others see them as a set of interconnected propositions that have the same reference, the subject of theory, and that's simply meaning that propositions come to explain a phenomenon. One that I really like is by Strauss and Corbin, and that is a set of well-developed concepts related through statements of relationship, which together constitute an integrated framework that can be used to explain or predict phenomenon. So you can decide which definition makes sense to you, but the important thing is to understand that a theory is not a concept on its own. It's a set of interrelated concepts that can explain a phenomenon. There are many theories in the social science world. You will never get to know them all. There's Marxist theory, for example. Some of you may have heard of string theory. Post-colonial theory is commonly talked about today, given our context in Canadian history. Social learning theory, motivation theory are common in education. All disciplines have their theory. And theory, of course, can travel. And in education, it's not a pure discipline, and we borrow. So lots of different theories enter into the scholarship. So here's a question. Do theories reflect reality, knowledge, or truth? So in antiquity, celestial bodies were considered different than earthly bodies. This was used as the explanation for why some things fell and others didn't, like stars, for example. Newton's theory of gravity explained that earthly elements fell, heavenly ones did not, and this lens changed how we viewed the world and transformed our knowledge. And of course, Newton's theory of gravity was challenged by things like relativity. A Kuhnian paradigm shift suggests that there's no endgame where an absolute truth exists in relation to a theoretical perspective. There's a continual dialectical process involving parts of the older theory in relation to the present theory, out of which future theory will emerge. So theory evolves, and where we may have understood the world through Ptolemaic lens at one point, this changed with the theory of gravity, then relativity changed it once again, quantum theories change it again, and on it goes. So theory helps us to think. It informs us explicitly and or implicitly, and thus experience and knowledge are in the same space, and they're not separate. So theory is typically seen as something beyond everyday life or something that's nice but won't work in practice. But Howell, as I mentioned in the very beginning, argues theory provides a means by which individuals may consider the difficulties they face on a day-to-day basis or may understand other individual social or political problems. End quote. So fundamentally, we're always thinking in a theoretical manner, but we don't undertake this thinking in a systematic way. But when it comes to teaching, theory, of course, can explain our experiences by relating it to something more abstract. It can inform us about what we're going to do pedagogically, how we think about students, families, etc. So unlike in the natural world, where we're in pursuit of laws that allow us to predict, social theory is not aiming for that. It's aiming to give insight and to explain. There are three building blocks of theory: concepts, constructs, and propositions. According to Anfer and Mertz, concepts are words that we assign to events, and they enable us to distinguish one event or sensation from another, and they allow us to relate events in the past to ones in the present or future. So a concept could be age, and a concept could be intelligence. Concepts cluster and form a higher order unit of thought that we call a construct. So Silver calls IQ, intelligence quotient, a construct. It incorporates the concepts of age and intelligence. So you see how that works? And then propositions are the next level of abstraction, and they are expressions of relationships among several constructs. They have to be carefully defined and explained because propositions are the essence of what forms theory. Probably something that all educators are familiar with is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is his theory of motivation, and it's a really great example for demonstrating concepts, constructs, and then theory. According to Maslow, human beings have a variety of needs, and these are concepts. Some are more fundamental than others, and he grouped these needs into 5 basic categories that you see there in the diagram. And these categories are what constructs are. So at the base is physiological need. This is a construct. Individually, food, water, shelter, air, these make up the construct physiological needs. But food, water, shelter on their own are concepts. At the next level, safety is composed of the concepts physical safety, financial safety, and that makes up the construct of safety. Love and belonging as a construct is composed of love, belonging, acceptance by others, and so on. So you get the picture. And these constructs, the physiological needs, safety, etc., are grouped hierarchically such that the theory can explain human behavior. Lower needs dominate behavior when they're not satisfied. Higher needs become salient only after the lower needs have been satisfied. And Maslow concluded that behavior is an expression of one's drive to reduce deficiencies by gratifying the most salient type of needs. That's his theory. So if you were trying to help a person who was experiencing poverty, for example, it would explain why they're not driving towards self-actualization goals. Something that's important to understand is that our social world is complex, and this accounts for why there are so many theories that try to explain it. But theory alone can't account for all conditions, and it can't always explain or predict how human reactions occur to things like change. And regardless of our theoretical foundations, there are still things in our social world that are inexplicable. This is why we're constantly doing research, especially in education, so that we can improve conditions for students and families. So here's how Anfra and Mertz define theoretical framework. They say it's any empirical or quasi-empirical theory of social and or psychological processes at a variety of levels that can be applied to the understanding of phenomena. My thinking aligns with Anfra and Mertz because they distinguish between conceptual and theoretical framework. All theory has a component part of concepts, but concepts alone can't explain a phenomenon. By distinction, a conceptual framework can help us to see certain things, but of course it always hides other aspects of an issue being explained. Conceptual frameworks provide an interpretive approach to social reality, and they give us an organizing frame through which to see the social world. They give us an understanding, but can't offer a theoretical explanation for something. So in this manner, we could say they're indeterminist because they don't enable us to predict an outcome. If I were to think about a metaphor that could be a helpful distinction between theoretical and conceptual framework, it would be this. You know how you can go to the grocery store and buy a prepackaged sandwich, egg salad, turkey, ham, whatever. That sandwich is already packaged for you, and it is the thing you're going to get. You don't pull it apart and do anything with it. A conceptual framework, on the other hand, is more like a deli sandwich. You go to the deli counter and you get to select for whatever works for you. You're going to have some cheese and some tomatoes and cucumbers and maybe mustard between whole grain bread, and that's your sandwich. The key is that a theoretical framework has been derived by lots and lots of scholarly work, often with empirical data collection, to arrive at a theoretical explanation for a social phenomena. A conceptual framework can be built from anything. It's something you can create. People can use metaphors. Often I hear that education is like climbing a mountain. It's a journey. That's a common metaphor. You can take artwork, you can create a diagram or a model or a matrix. It can be something that you develop after reading a lot of the research to find out the key elements of a particular topic. So that's a very pedestrian way of thinking about it, but sometimes it's helpful to go down to very common terms and think of it that way. What I think is important to emphasize is that there is a distinction between a theoretical and conceptual framework. Now, when you are told to use a theoretical or conceptual framework in writing a research paper, for example, what does that mean? Well, the idea that it is a framework means it's a lens through which you look at something. So a particular problem in education that you might want to examine can be explored from a variety of theoretical frameworks, depending on what you're trying to understand. People have studied, for example, gender issues in school leadership. For their purposes, a feminist theory would be important because a feminist theory shines a light on power discrepancies that are based on gender. A Marxist theory wouldn't be appropriate for that particular analysis because Marxist theory enables one to see power differentials based on social class. A Marxist feminist theory, however, would be an appropriate theoretical framework to use if you wanted to examine how gender and social class interact to create power differentials in school leadership between men and women. Similarly, a conceptual framework is not a theory, but it is a framework all the same. So if you wanted to examine some of the shifts that have happened in school-home relationships, for example, since the COVID-19 pandemic started, you might create your own framework to look at social changes, cultural changes, financial changes, that kind of thing. You get to decide and you get to choose based on what it is you are looking for. Because it is a framework, whether it's theoretical or conceptual, things are always shut out. Think of it like a camera lens. You can only see what's in view. So I hope this has been important, a distinction that has settled in your mind. But more importantly, I want you to be able to feel confident that you know how you can use a theoretical or conceptual framework in your scholarly writing. Thank you for listening. I'm Bonnie Stelmach from the University of Alberta, and I appreciate your attention to this video.